father is not a man who raises his voice. He built his company over 40 years in Portland, Oregon, commercial real estate, the kind of quiet money that doesn't announce itself. He drives the same truck he bought in 2009. He wears flannel shirts to board meetings. When he is disappointed in you, he doesn't yell. He just gets very still, and the stillness is worse than anything else he could do. So when he showed up at my apartment door on a Tuesday morning in March, unannounced, and found me in a threadbare maternity cardigan with a hole at the elbow, holding my 2-week-old daughter while eating cold oatmeal standing over the sink, and then looked around the apartment slowly, the way he used to look at a property before he made an offer, I knew something was about to change. He didn't say hello. He said, "Where is the money going?" And I said, "What money?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he took out his phone, turned it around, and showed me a wire transfer confirmation. $180,000. Sent to a joint account in my name and my husband's name 31 days ago. Like every month for the past 2 years and 4 months. I had never seen that account number in my life. I need to back up. My father raised me alone in Portland after my mother left when I was 4. I don't have siblings. It was always just us, in the house on Thurman Street with the rhododendrons out front, that he never quite got around to trimming. He coached my soccer team even though he didn't know anything about soccer. He learned to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial and did it badly for 6 years, until I finally told him ponytails were fine. He is the kind of man who shows love through action, rather than language, and I grew up knowing that about him, and I loved him for it, even when it was hard to read. He sold his first property portfolio when I was in college. I didn't know the scope of what that meant until I was older. He never talked about money in a way that made me feel like I was supposed to track it. I had a normal childhood. Good schools, soccer camps, a reliable car when I turned 17. Nothing that screamed wealth. Nothing that made me think I was different from anyone else. When I graduated from nursing school at 24, he told me he was setting up a fund for me. A trust, technically. He said his financial advisor would be in touch. I signed some paperwork. He said it was just to make sure I was taken care of, that I would never have to worry the way he had worried when he was young. I thanked him and went back to work. I didn't understand what taken care of meant until my husband explained it to me 8 months later, shortly before we got married. He said my father had told him about it. He said he wanted to be honest with me. He said my father sent a monthly distribution. He called it a distribution, not an allowance, not a gift, a distribution, like he'd already memorized the vocabulary, and that he'd been helping manage the logistics so I didn't have to worry about it. He was an MBA, he said. He understood financial structures. He didn't want me stressed about administrative details when I was already working long shifts at the hospital. I thought that was thoughtful. I thought I was lucky to have someone who wanted to take care of the details. That was my first mistake. His name was Rowan. We met at a fundraiser my father hosted for a children's hospital. Rowan was there with a colleague. He was 32, confident without being loud about it, the kind of handsome that photographs well but is better in person. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He talked about his late grandmother with real sadness. He remembered what I told him the first night and brought it up weeks later. He seemed, in every way, like a person who paid attention. We dated for 14 months. He was kind and consistent. He got along with my father, which was not easy. My father is not a warm man on first meeting, and he has a radar for people who are performing. But Rowan seemed genuine. He asked my father about the company. He asked good questions. My father called him sharp, which was the highest compliment he gave to anyone. We got married in October, at a vineyard outside of Newburgh. It was small, 60 people. My father danced exactly one dance and then stood at the edge of the room looking pleased. We moved into a rental in the Pearl District. Nice neighborhood, reasonable rent, or so I thought. I was working 3 12-hour shifts a week at OHSU. Rowan was building a consulting practice, he said. Things were slow at first, which was normal, he said. He handled the finances because he had the expertise and I had the schedule, and that arrangement made sense on paper, and so I let it happen. His mother, Patrice, moved from Scottsdale to Portland 8 months into our marriage. She said it was for the winters. She was tired of the desert heat. She got an apartment 12 minutes from ours. She was there 4 or 5 times a week. Patrice had opinions about how I stored leftovers, about the brand of dish soap I bought, about the way I'd arranged the nursery when I was 5 months pregnant. She came over while I was at work and rearranged it. And when I came home and stood in the doorway looking at the room that was no longer mine, she said, "I just thought it would flow better. Sweetheart." She called me sweetheart the way some people use a word they don't mean. She had a gift for the comment that sounded like helpfulness and landed like a correction. Rowan never contradicted her. When I said something to him about it privately, he said his mother had been through a hard year and she was just trying to feel useful. He said it with so much gentleness toward her that I felt like the complaint was mine to be embarrassed about. I started saying less. I told myself this was what compromise looked like. I told myself I was adjusting to sharing my life with another family. We were not comfortable. That was what I didn't understand, or what I kept not letting myself understand. I was working 3 shifts a week while 7 months pregnant and riding the axe because the car situation was complicated right now. I was shopping at the discount grocery and telling myself I preferred it. I was eating lunch at work because the vending machine food was cheaper than what we had at home. I was doing this while my husband described himself at dinner parties I was too tired to attend as someone who was between projects but with some exciting things in development. There was a Tuesday in January when I finished a 12-hour overnight shift, still in my scrubs, and stopped to get a coffee before taking the train home. The coffee shop had a window that faced the street. I was standing there, waiting, looking at nothing, and I saw Patrice get out of a car service, black SUV, the kind that costs money per mile. She was wearing a coat I'd seen in a boutique window in West 23rd that I had walked past and not gone into because I was watching the budget. She was laughing at something on her phone. She looked rested. She looked like someone who had nowhere to be and liked it that way. I watched her disappear around the corner. I drank my coffee. I told myself I didn't know what her finances were. I told myself she might have savings. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself a lot of things. My daughter was born in late February. I named her Sable. My father came to the hospital within an hour of my call and sat in the chair by the window and held her with the same focused quiet he brings to everything important. He stayed until visiting hours ended. He left without making a speech about it. I was back at work at 8 weeks because I needed the income. We had credit card debt that Rowan said was temporary. We had a car payment on a car I never drove. We had expenses that blurred when I tried to look at them directly, which I realize now was not an accident. I was running on hospital cafeteria food and adrenaline and the specific love of a new mother that can override almost everything else. I was not asking the questions I should have been asking. I was surviving, which left no space for investigating. My father came to see us on a Saturday in late March. I had Sable in the carrier on my chest. I'd been on a double shift the day before and hadn't had time to change out of the cardigan I'd worn for 2 days, which had a pulled thread at the elbow and a small formula stain near the pocket that I kept forgetting to treat. The apartment was clean because I'd cleaned it at midnight because it was the only time I had. My father stood in the doorway. He looked at me, he looked at Sable, he looked at the cardigan. He came inside and sat down and didn't say anything for a moment, which is how I knew something was wrong. Then he asked where the money was going. When I showed him my bank account, the one I'd had since college, the one my direct deposit went into, he looked at the balance and then looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since I was a child and broke something I should have been more careful with. Not anger, something that was the prior condition of anger, the place anger comes from before it has a name. I showed him what I had. I told him about the credit cards. I told him about the car payment. I told him about the overtime I was pulling. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked Rowan's full name, the name of the bank, the name of the account that the trust distributions went into each month. I didn't know the account. I didn't know the bank. I realized, sitting there, that I had signed paperwork 2 years ago and trusted that the architecture of it was what Rowan said it was, and had never once verified, because I was tired and I trusted him, and because somewhere in me I had absorbed the message that finances were his domain and I should stay in mine. My father took out his phone. He called his attorney. He didn't raise his voice. He was very still and very clear, and when he spoke he used sentences that were short and factual. He had access to the trust documentation. He knew the account numbers. He said he wanted a forensic audit by end of week. He was on the phone for 11 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "You didn't know." It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. "I didn't know," I said. "I know you didn't," he said. What the audit found took 6 weeks to fully document, but the shape of it was clear within days. The monthly trust distributions, $180,000 each month for 28 months, had been going into the joint account, which Rowan had structured so that I had nominal ownership, but no practical access. The funds were routed from that account into 3 places: a personal account in Rowan's name only, a business account for a consulting LLC that had no clients and no revenue, and a third account that required more time to trace. He had been paying for Patrice's apartment, her car service, a storage unit in Scottsdale she still maintained, 2 international trips she'd taken in the past year. He'd furnished a separate apartment in Southeast Portland, not the one we lived in, with high-end furniture and equipment. He'd invested in 2 ventures that my father's attorney described as speculative at best, fictitious at worst. The third account held funds that had been moved offshore. That one took longer. The amount taken over 28 months was not the full sum of the distributions. He had apparently not been stupid enough to take everything. He had been leaving small amounts in accessible places, just enough to create the appearance of movement without the substance of access. In the end, the figure the forensic accountant gave my father was $4.2 million, redirected across accounts that I had never been invited to see. I had been working overnight shifts at a hospital while 8 months pregnant because I thought we needed the money. We needed the money. We just hadn't needed it the way I thought we did. Rowan was staying at a hotel when my father's attorney served him with papers. I found this out later. He had apparently felt something coming. A phone call he'd been on with Patrice where she told him my father had visited, and something in the way I'd spoken the night before, and had packed a bag and left before morning. He called me once from the hotel. He said he could explain. He said the situation was more complicated than it looked. He said he had made decisions that he believed were in our long-term interest. He said he needed me to hear him out before I made any choices. I listened to him say all of this. I was standing in the kitchen of our apartment, Sable and the bouncer on the counter, the cardigan finally in the trash where it belonged. When he finished, I said, "Okay." He took that as encouragement. He started to say something else. I said, "My father's attorney will be in contact with yours," and hung up. He called 3 more times. I didn't answer. The legal process was longer than I wanted it to be and shorter than it could have been. Rowan's attorney made noises about the joint account structure, about the nature of the distributions, about the complexity of the trust documentation. My father's attorney was not interested in complexity. She had 30 years of experience and the kind of organized contempt for bad faith arguments that only comes from having heard all of them before. The offshore account, it was in the Cayman Islands, which I still find almost insultingly cinematic, was recoverable in part because of a paperwork error on Rowan's end that his attorney clearly found humiliating. He did not go to prison, which is the part I have had to make my peace with. His attorney was skilled enough to frame the account structuring as a mismanagement dispute rather than fraud, and the civil settlement made prosecution a lower priority for everyone except me. What he did pay back, under court order, was $3,400,000 returned to the trust over a structured timeline with interest. The remaining funds were not recovered. His consulting LLC was dissolved. His credit was, by all accounts, destroyed. Patrice moved back to Scottsdale. I have not heard from her since the day the papers were filed. My father bought the house we live in now outright. It is in Lake Oswego, 12 minutes from his office, with a backyard that Sable will grow up in. It is rhododendrons in front that neither of us trim. He comes for dinner on Thursdays. He holds Sable like she is something he has been waiting for without knowing it, and she grabs his finger and doesn't let go. And I watch them and feel something I don't have the right word for yet. Not quite forgiveness, not quite closure, something that exists before those words, in the place where you finally understand you made it through. My father is not a man who says I love you easily. But he shows up. He has always shown up. I understand now that the money was never the point. The point was that he was trying to take care of me the only way he knew how, from a distance, across the life I was building. He made an error in not telling me directly. He has said so. He told me, sitting at my kitchen table after the audit was done, that he should have put it in my hands and nobody else's. That he should have sat down with me and walked through every line. That he had assumed the structure was protection and had not imagined that the structure itself was the vulnerability. I told him that wasn't his fault. He said, some of it was. And then we sat there in my kitchen in Lake Oswego and drank coffee and watched Sable sleep in the bouncer on the table and didn't say anything for a while. And it was the best conversation we'd had in years. I'm 31 now. I work 2 shifts a week by choice rather than necessity. I have a financial advisor my father introduced me to, a woman named someone who has known my father for 15 years and who explains everything twice until I understand it and doesn't make me feel like I should already know. Every distribution goes into an account that only I can access. I review it monthly. I understand what I have and what it means and what it is for. I think about what Rowan said on the phone that day when he told me the situation was more complicated than it looked. And I think, no. It was actually very simple. He saw someone who trusted easily and who had been raised to believe that love meant not having to ask questions. He studied that. He used it. He built a life on top of mine and called it partnership. He didn't love me. He found me. There's a difference. It took me a while to hold that clearly, to say it without flinching, but I hold it now, and I hold Sable in the backyard on the Thursday evenings when my father comes to dinner, while the rhododendrons do whatever they want because nobody is trimming them, and I feel the specific solidity of a life that is mine, actually mine, in every account and every room, and I think this is what it was supposed to feel like all along. It just took a Tuesday morning in March, and a man who got very still and a question that changed everything, to find out. I still think about the cardigan sometimes. The one with the pulled thread at the elbow and the formula stain I kept forgetting to treat. I wore it for 2 days straight because I didn't have the time or the energy to care, and I think about how much of my life in those years looked like that cardigan, functional on the surface, quietly coming apart at the edges, and me too exhausted to stop and look at it directly. Rowan didn't stumble into what he did. He was careful and he was patient and he studied me before he chose me. He saw someone who had been raised to believe that love meant not having to ask certain questions. He saw someone who had been taught, gently and without anyone meaning harm, that money was a detail other people handled. He built an entire architecture around those two things and called it a marriage. That's not bad luck. That's a decision. And every month that I signed nothing, verified nothing, asked nothing, I was handing him another brick. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think the most important thing I've learned is that being a good person is not the same as being a protected one. I was trusting and I was loyal. And I worked overnight shifts while 8 months pregnant because I thought we needed the income, and none of those things were weaknesses. But I had confused goodness with passivity, and that confusion cost me 4 years and more than I want to calculate. What my father did that Tuesday morning wasn't just about the money. It was about paying attention. He came to my door unannounced, and he looked at me. Actually looked, the way he used to look at a property before making an offer. And he saw something that didn't add up. He asked the question he was afraid to ask, because asking it meant the answer might be real. And then, when it was real, he didn't flinch. He got still and clear. And he made 11 minutes of phone calls that changed everything. That's not just love. That's the kind of clarity that comes from refusing to look away from what's in front of you, even when it's hard. I think about Patrice in that coat on NINW 23rd, getting out of the car service, rested and unhurried, while I was standing in a coffee shop in yesterday's scrubs. I had every piece of information I needed in that moment. I chose not to assemble it. I told myself I didn't know her finances, that it wasn't my business, that there was probably an explanation. I was practicing a kind of willful softness that I had mistaken for kindness. Real kindness to myself would have looked like asking the question. I have a financial advisor now. I read every document before I sign it. I review my accounts monthly, and I understand what I have and what it means and why. This is not cynicism. This is what it looks like to finally respect the life you're living enough to pay attention to it. Sable is 16 months old. She grabs my father's finger and doesn't let go, and I watch them in the backyard on Thursday evenings, and I think about what gets passed down. Not money, not property, but the posture you take toward your own life. Whether you look at it directly, whether you ask the hard question when something doesn't add up, whether you get still and clear and make the call. That's what I want her to have.